Professor Klein is the director of the Judaic Studies, or is it Jewish Studies program? It's Jewish on the East Coast, Judaic on the West Coast. The Jewish Studies program, and professor of history at Klein University in New Jersey. And he's the author of a number of books, among them The Jewish Origins of the Psychoanalytic Movement and The Hidden History of the Kovno Ghetto. He's also the founding editor of Dimensions, a journal of Holocaust studies, and the founding director of the Anti-Defamation League's Brown Center for Holocaust Studies. And we've actually gone over a number of different titles for lectures, and I actually don't remember what the official title of tonight's is. I know the subtitle is Rereading Post-Traumatic Testimonies, which is really the gist of what you're getting at, yeah. Because it can be approached in a number of different ways. I heard Dennis speak earlier today, and I can promise you that you're in for a treat and something very fascinating. So I'm very glad that you've joined us. Just a note about some future or upcoming programming. Next week on Tuesday evening, we'll be hosting Maxim Schreier, who teaches at Boston College, is a scholar of Russian Jewish literature and also an author in his own right. And he's going to be talking about some Russian Jewish poems that were written and disseminated in the Soviet Union during the Shoah, during the period of the Holocaust, on the theme of the Holocaust itself. So that should be quite an interesting talk. There'll be more information about that on our website, which is pdx.edu/Judaic. And also, for those of you who are not aware, the Portland Jewish Film Festival is going on right now with a lot of very interesting and important films. And you can Google that and find it online pretty easily. So thank you all for coming out tonight on a very wet and rainy night. And Dennis Klein, I'd like to ask you to share your research with us.
Thank you, Professor Mayer, and thank you for inviting me out to your lovely campus and weather, or at least campus. It's a pleasure to meet many of you and to have this opportunity to share with you some of the research that I have and am continuing to do. And so here's what I'd like to do this evening. I want to begin to invite us to examine our traditional, conventional understanding of the Holocaust or the Shoah. How we generally understand that development in the 1940s. And so what we can begin to do is to recognize that we think about the Holocaust and probably genocide generally as a massive development. That is to say, we refer to, more specifically, the Holocaust as a product of state-generated propaganda and ideology. We refer to the mass deportations of Jews and others to the East. We understand and recognize the role of concentration camps as the nadir of these developments. In short, we look at the Holocaust, and again genocide, as a state phenomena, top-down phenomena, with a lot of larger-than-life approaches to understanding how the Holocaust had happened. What I'd like to do is to challenge these conceptions, or to begin to look at this development differently. And in doing so, I rely on some pretty important recent research that is reorienting our examination of this development from the ground up. To give you an idea of what I mean by that, I want to refer to, say, the research of one historian, Omer Bartov, who is developing a book as we speak. I think one of the more seminal historians, certainly on this subject, a Brown University historian, who is looking specifically at testimonies regarding the Holocaust as it evolved in Eastern Europe, and in his case, more specifically in Ukraine. He is looking at a phenomenon that he refers to as communal massacres. That is to say, when we look at, say, Ukraine and Poland and other countries in Eastern Europe, he reminds us that we need to understand that much of what we refer to as the Holocaust took place village by village, within these villages, right? A communal phenomenon, not the kind of what we tend to understand as, right, state-generated destruction. And so, in one account, he quotes one whose name was Fanny, who from her hiding place witnessed Ukrainian police who discovered 7 of her relatives. And in her words, they, the police, knew these people. They told them, "We are not going to do nothing to you, just give whatever you have, and we will let you go." They gave them everything, and when they went out, everyone separately got a bullet in the head. And so, this is part of the question, part of the problem that Bartov is exploring. That is to say, when destruction takes place locally, right, and not as this kind of larger phenomenon of state murder, there is more commonly a reality of the victims having known their assailants. They know them. They're familiar with these people before the assault. Therefore, the destruction process is one of a breach of trust, a broken relationship from the relationship that existed prior to destruction. And here I'd like to borrow some of the insights from some psychological work that might help us to understand better these developments, this phenomenon. And the specific term that I want to therefore borrow is the term betrayal trauma. We are looking at acts of betrayal. That is to say, again, it is the shock, according to the victims who give us their reports, the shock of recognizing their friends, their lovers, and neighbors who were now their killers. I'm shifting, therefore, with Bartov, of course, the focus from what we can now refer to, right, as a macro annihilation, the state, to micro annihilation, right? Something that's more local, something that is communal, or that familiarity that is woven into much of the testimonies that we read coming out of Eastern Europe. Some of these developments, by the way, are a result, is research development, is a result of the collapse of communism in 1989, opening up, right, access to scholars, the archives and other documentation, and to sometimes the witnesses themselves in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet, former Soviet Union, in which we can begin to understand the Holocaust as it took place in Eastern Europe, which after all was a major locus, right, of the destruction. In this regard, I want to refer to another scholar one whom I like a great deal, and his name is Jan Gross. Jan Gross wrote about 9 years ago, a book called, with the provocative title, Neighbors. And in that study, he writes about one Polish village, Jedwabne, which in July of 1942, to be exact, July 10, 1942, the citizens of this small village, of some 3,000 plus, who were not Jewish, turned against their neighbors who were Jewish, and in that one day destroyed the community, some 1,600 Jews. For Gross, the important question, in addition to that terrible reality, was the relationships that these folks had with each other before these events that started actually several weeks before. That is to say, these were neighbors, Jew and non-Jew. They met each other at marketplaces. They went to school, their kids with each other. There was a social life. They looked to each other for assistance whenever necessary. They talked to each other, right, as neighbors. As you and I, right, have a relationship, we hope, with our neighbors. What Gross really begins to help us understand is that the relationship prior to the destruction was a good one. It was a fraught relationship, to be sure. Anti-Semitism, after all, is ingrained. We understand that. But nonetheless, on the day-to-day level, right, looking again at the local development that I'm referring to here, day-to-day, Gross observes that the relationships were good, or let's just say they were not hostile. And so, Gross quotes one witness, not Jewish, who reports, "Here there were no such big differences in opinion or whatever, because Poles and Jews were, in this little town, on good terms, depending on each other. Everybody was on a first-name basis. Janek, Itchek. Life here was, I would say, somehow idyllic." That's the phenomenon that Gross is looking at. And the question, of course, how could good, or let's just say good enough neighbors, turn against each other, or turn in this case against one group, and proceed to the extreme right behavior of destruction? What I'm particularly interested in is using this kind of material, this research, to begin to understand how survivors recall this past. And I want to refer to in particular some very good studies by Lawrence Langer and others, who without that background nonetheless are able to find in Holocaust testimonies, post-traumatic testimonies, multiple voices or narratives in the testimonies. What I would like to refer to as stratified, right? The stratification of memory. There is more than one narrative in these testimonies. Langer refers to two, common memory and deep memory. And I like the framework, even the terminology. There is something that is going on in these testimonies that alerts us to something more complicated than what you and I tend to glean from